Diets, what the fuck are they? Do they work? Are they necessary? Are they helpful? Are they useless? Let's do it.
What is the actual definition of diet? Do you
Yeah,
know?
it's not on the top, off the top of my tongue, off the top of my mind. I don't know. I can have a quick look.
So here it says the kinds of foods that a person, animal, or community habitually eats.
Yep.
Interesting. A special course of food to which a person restricts themselves, either to lose weight or for medical reasons. So that's the second definition. I kind of like the first definition because it just encompassing all the foods that you generally eat, and it doesn't really have that connotation, which means this is for me to lose weight
Yeah.
or yeah.
I think they're both useful. So it just sort of depends where you're at and what you're trying to do. But again, like I said, I like to think of it in terms more of like my body is a complex dynamic system that requires energy, all right? But it also requires nutrients and building blocks to sustain my structure or maintain the structure, and then also complete the functions that I want my structure to be able to do. So if you then, you think of it through that lens, food is energy plus building blocks for your body. You have those two things, and there'll be a space where there's essential things that you need to ingest, like energy and certain building blocks, and then there's non-essential things. So I typically try to bias, or historically I used to bias for non-essential things, whereas now, as I've got older and become more educated and have, sort of am understanding my body a bit better and its demands and its requirements, I now eat more towards the essential things. And once I've, satisfied all of the essential requirements, or I've ingested all the things that are essential, if then there's some room left over or there's some energy still needs to be consumed, I can go for non-essential things.
Have you ever tried one of the not essential, sorry, one of the fad diets? Have you ever attempted any of them?
Yeah, so I've actually had quite a diverse exploration through diets. So I've tried vegetarianism, I've tried veganism, I've tried the carnivore, I've tried your typical, Western diet, tried your Mediterranean diet, I've tried the keto diet, I've tried the zone diet, I've tried the Atkins diet, I've tried the paleo diet, tried the paleo low carb diet. What else? Practice fasting. I've tried the fruitarian diet where you just eat fruit. Uh, what else? I've done juice ones previously where you just drink juices. I've explored a broad range of different nutrition practices or diet.
Dude, are you serious?
Yeah, yeah.
That's fucking wild, bro. Okay. What is or which diet have you had the most success with, would you say?
Um, well, so it depends how we define success in this case, right? So when I was bodybuilding, I used a bodybuilding diet, which is essentially like moderate to high protein, depending on where you are in your phase. If you're trying to gain weight, you can go with moderate protein and you have much higher carbohydrates and lower fats. And then when you're dieting, you sort of have your protein a little bit higher, your fats still keep your fats quite low, and then you just sort of modulate or reduce or increase your carbohydrates based on the energy balance. So if you're trying to lose more weight, you pull the carbs back a bit, so you're in more of a deficit. And when you're trying to gain weight, you push those carbs up, and you typically bring your protein down to push the mass gain. So that worked. Like I was able to put on lots of muscle and gain weight and build muscle, and when I wanted to then lose fat, I could get in really good shape. So I've been in single digit body fat numbers before, and I did that using a bodybuilding diet. So that worked. Was it the best thing for health? No, I don't think so. Was it incredibly difficult to eat all of the carbohydrates and calories when you're bodybuilding and trying to bulk? Yeah, it's really difficult. Puts lots of stress on the digestive system. You get systemic inflammation from consuming large amounts of carbohydrates chronically, etc. But it worked for the purpose that I was using it for, which was to build muscle and gain weight. and to lose the body fat and, reveal the muscle that you'd work hard to build. And then in other circumstances, what I've been doing more recently is probably a little bit more of a carnivore approach, where I typically eat protein and fats, and I've pushed my fats quite a bit higher, and I've dropped my carbohydrates down. And that works for me because of the type of things that I'm doing with my body now. So, most of the stuff that I'm doing is cognitive based. It's not physical exertion anymore. It's more cognitive tasks, more thinking and working with my brain. And so, fat and ketones tend to be a good fuel source for that. And I find that my brain function is better eating more for that way. So lower carbohydrates, moderate protein, and higher fats, typically from animal-based sources. And it's interesting because I've also done the vegetarian and the vegan diet. And I didn't feel bad initially when I did those. I actually felt quite good initially. If that, I actually had like a bit of a euphoria when I first started. But what I noticed when I started to do it more long term, so after about the first 5 to 6 weeks, is I started to feel different in the gym. I didn't have the same levels of, I'd say aggression, but not necessarily a bad aggression, like a healthy aggression in the gym where you want to attack the weights, you want to lift heavy stuff. And the more that I did the vegan, the less and less I sort of wanted to or cared about doing that. And so my strength started to suffer a little bit. And I'll tell you a funny story. And the most intense thing about having a vegan diet was the size of your shit, or my shit especially. So to get enough calories for someone of my body weight and my activity level, the amount of muscle mass that I had when I was doing this, it was like a full-time job eating, right? Because, vegetables aren't typically very calorie dense. And they're not necessarily very dense in nutrition either. And so I had to eat huge amounts of vegetables, like just an enormous amount of vegetables. And with that, you get a lot of fiber. So when I was doing the vegan diet, after the first 2 weeks, I noticed that size of my dumps or my shit was increasing at a kind of an alarming rate. And so at about week 6 to week 8 of this vegan diet, I was spending anywhere between an hour and 2 hours each morning going to the toilet, like multiple shits. And I'm talking like multiple shits that when you did them, they would almost touch your bum. Like building in the toilet. Like I would be doing two to four shits each morning. Before I'd leave the house. And
what the fuck?
Yeah, so I found that to me wasn't, I didn't want to spend my life doing that. And so that plus the sort of increased apathy or increased sort of like, low vibrational state, like I was very like, like no real zest for life, so to speak. I decided to change that. And then when looking into it, I sort of stumbled across an interesting way to think about it, I think. And I don't think it's talked about very often. And that is that animals, especially ruminant animals, are actually nutrition aggregators. Right? So they go out, or their whole life essentially is about eating vegetables or plants or grasses. Okay? They spend most of their days eating and chewing, regurgitating what they've ingested, re-chewing it, and then putting it back, digesting it. They go out all day, every day, and just consume an immense amount of plant matter and vegetables and all sorts of different things. And then they aggregate all of that nutrition into a sort of package that then we can harvest and absorb in a more bioavailable form, a form that is more similar to our tissue than it is to plant tissue, if that kind of makes sense. So I sort of started to think about it in terms of efficiency. I was like, okay, well, if plants have all this nutrition, but then animals eat those plants and absorb that nutrition, well, then eating the animals is sort of the most efficient way to get nutrition. And I think it's a bit of a hack. And so, that's when I started to transition into more of this carnivore stuff. And I must say that the between the vegan and the carnivore is not only my clarity in my mind and my energy levels, how good I feel. I don't go to the toilet as much. They're definitely not as big. It's very efficient, and I don't have to spend much of my day eating food because I can eat 1 to 2 or even 3 meals sometimes that are smaller, but they're more nutrient dense and they're more dense in calories as well. So I spend less time eating, I spend less time digesting, which means I have more time and more energy for the things that I was thinking.
I also have a vegan experience as well.
Oh yeah?
So I tried veganism probably, well, not veganism, but just the vegan diet for probably 2.5 years. Because veganism is essentially a lifestyle, and there's so many sort of layers to living a vegan lifestyle. But I just adopted the diet because I thought that it might be able to take me to the next level, right? In my training, in my health, and everything. So I went pure vegan, and like you, I was feeling great at first. I was like, "Yo, this is a game changer. This is dope."
Did you watch that documentary?
Yeah.
Is that what started
for
it?
sure. Around that time, there was like a series of docs. I don't remember when they came out, but yeah, I am remembering back to one of those docs. I believe one was about raw food, plant-based diet, which I sort of structured my diet around. And in that documentary, they were showing, I don't know if it was necessarily studies, but one of the guys was talking about how it can essentially cure many different diseases, reverse cancer, making outrageous claims. I was like, oh, this is like this sounds great, right? It sounds really good. So, anyways, I went full force with it. Like we have this place in Canada. It's called Bulk Barn.
Yep.
And I don't know what it's like now because I haven't been there in years, but when I used to go, it was unreal. Like you could buy as much of whatever seed you want. Like I'm talking about hemp seeds, chia seeds, like you name it, and nuts. And I was buying all of that shit and mixing it with potatoes, with sweet potatoes, with juca, and then all the different leafy vegetables and everything, and beans and all sorts of beans. And it was just getting wild. And I did also supplement with omega-3 though. So you could argue that it wasn't a vegan diet.
Vegan
but vegan based, yeah. Plant-based, whole food plant-based diet with some omega-3. But anyways, and for the first couple of months, like you, I felt great. And then something changed. And our stories are so similar because I also noticed in the gym as well, in my recovery, in my energy levels. And I was just stubborn, dude. I was like, no, I can't. It's not because of my diet. It's something else, right? So I just kept going and going. And I did this for like 2.5 years, bro.
Oh, wow.
I stuck to it. I was like a robot. I would not, dude, I would be packing my own meals when I would go out with friends to restaurants. Like I'd be going out to the car, eating out of a fucking bag sometimes. So I was dedicated. But yeah, after a few months, I just didn't feel good and I wasn't training good. And that went on and on and on. And it just got to the point where I was like, yeah, it's the diet. The shit's just not working for me. And it's not for everybody,
Right.
So I went back to eating meat. And like as soon as I went back to eating meat, it was like an overnight change. I was like, okay, like this is probably what I should be eating.
Yeah.
Right.
Quick question. Were your shits huge as well, or?
No, I had lots of frequent shits and they were explosive.
Oh,
I
wow.
actually had a reputation. People would know when I took a shit. They would know it by the smell and they would know it by how the bowl got painted. It was crazy. It was crazy.
Okay.
Like, oh,
You go.
no, I was just gonna say, oh, Polska must have took a shit here because it was always like the same like painted line in the bowl, the same color and the same smell.
Yeah, my brother calls those pterodactyl shits.
Pterodactyl shits.
Yeah, or it's like
Yeah.
a pterodactyl flew over and did a shit from above, and it just bang, it splats everywhere.
Oh yeah, I got you. I got you. Yeah,
Um, so okay, so when you went back to eating meat, did you notice a change in your stool, like in the shits you were doing?
yeah, yeah. My shits went back to normal, like
Yeah,
a normal, more dense, loggish form type of shit, like a feel good shit, like a shit should be.
yeah.
So we could argue that I wasn't doing the veganish diet correctly, right? I mean, the most difficult part for me, I think, is fiber control. Because if you're eating a shit ton of seeds and beans, like you're probably getting way too much fucking fiber. And if you're eating too much goddamn fiber, you're not going to be absorbing the nutrients as efficiently, right? And for me, it just made me shit a lot. So who knows if I would have done it in a different way, if I would have structured it in a different way, maybe I would have had different results. What do you think?
Look, I'm sure there's adjustments you could have made to improve the quality of your stool and all that kind of stuff. But at the end of the day, what you were doing just wasn't working for what you wanted. So change it. You know, this is an important point about diets. Is there is no one right or wrong diet. There are diets that work for you and don't work for you. And what works for you at one point in time might not always work for you because your needs and your lifestyle and all of those things might change. So at the end of the day, I think talking about it in terms of diets is kind of silly in some aspect, but it's also necessary in another aspect. But a better way to think about it is in terms of nourishment, nutrition, nourishment, and energy. Like, what are the energy needs of your body? Like, what do you want to do with your body, or what's required of your body day to day, week to week, month to month? Okay. And then what nutrition do you need to support that? Like, what does your body require to do all of those things? What are you deficient in? Because you should try and replenish that, because that will inhibit pathways in the body. That will mean that some things can't be done because the necessary ingredients or the parts aren't in the body to complete the loop or complete the process. So yeah, thinking about it in terms of nourishment and energy, I think is much more useful. Yeah. So if you're somebody who's training in the gym, you will require a little bit more protein, right? Because you're going to have a higher protein turnover because you're using, your muscles, which are amino acids, but they're proteins, actin and myosin. So you need to ingest more of those proteins because you're using them and potentially damaging them down at a faster rate than somebody else. Yeah. If you're somebody who's doing a lot of explosive activities, then you're probably going to want to eat more carbohydrates to fuel that explosive activity. If you're somebody that isn't, and you're somebody who does a lot of cognitive work, I would say that you're probably wanting to have some ketones in your body at times. Get the fat or the cholesterol or the ketones across the blood-brain barrier into the brain, and the brain is between 60 and 80% fat. So you need that fat in the brain for your brain to function optimally, as well as other nutrients that help complete the task or contribute to being able to build neurotransmitters. All those.
So is that why we're idiots, Guy? We don't have enough fat in our brains?
Yes. No, we're idiots because we are idiots. We just we're idiots because we choose to identify as idiots.
Well, welcome back to Idiots Squared. Definitely the most open-minded podcast in the world, where two complete idiots are just trying to figure what all this shit's about. Remember to subscribe, like the video, share the video, and yeah, remember that we're just two idiots talking shit. So take everything we say with a grain of salt, but also, try some of this shit out. It might be working for you. Everyone's an individual, so take it for what you will.
That's just two idiots' take on it, right?
Yeah.
Also, don't forget to comment, okay? Comment, comment, and subscribe. It'll help us with the algorithm, and it's also going to help to keep us motivated. No, it probably won't. We like doing this just because it's fun. So today we're talking about diet, right? We got a nice intro to diets. Are they useful? Are they bullshit? What the hell are they? All the rest of it. So I think they can be useful for certain people, but then for other people, I think they're probably harmful. I think, people can get stuck on trying to find the fad diet or whatever, whereas sometimes looking at it through a lens of nutrition and energy balance is probably the most useful for people. And that's what I found to be very useful for myself. And so I typically try to structure my diet, right, or my nutrition around nourishing my body, providing the nutrition and the building blocks that it needs, and also the energy.
When we talk about a population who would benefit from, going on a diet, for example, people who suffer from obesity or people who are overweight and just want to lose some fat, become more fit, generally the literature says that these fad diets actually don't work because they're not sustainable, which means that you begin a fad diet, and you might be able to do it for a few weeks up until you get off track. And then when you go back to your regular diet, you actually end up regaining the weight that you lost during the fad diet plus more. And you go through this yo-yoing effect. And over a long span of time, you actually aren't getting any health benefits from it, because losing weight and gaining weight, the cycle is actually quite dangerous for the body. So in my perspective, there isn't any diet out there that's actually effective because they're not sustainable in time for that specific population. Would you agree with that, Rubes, or do you have a different take on that?
I do agree with parts of it, but I do have a different take. So I think the reason why these things don't work the way that we, sort of think or thought that they should work, the reason that this yo-yoing effect happens is because it isn't the diet that's actually it isn't the diet that's really the problem. Like, it is, but it isn't. We need to address the underlying issue. Why are people choosing the foods that don't love them back? Okay. Why are people, addicted to eating things that result in them, with a body composition that they don't want, or a body composition that is quite unhealthy? Why are they going for these foods? All right. So, you can put someone on a diet for a short period of time and they can adhere to it. But what you said is key is then it's not sustainable. Then they go back to what they were doing previously, or they overcompensate for what they were doing previously. And I think it's because, a decent percentage of people who have this problem, they're essentially eating their emotions, right? They're using food as a way to feel good, to get some dopamine, to get a feel good experience, and they're sort of addicted to that. It's very easy to get it now. I think a large part of the problem with obesity and people being so overweight and unhealthy in this regard is that we have so much hyper palatable food. We have food that really hijacks our reward pathways. So in nature, you don't typically find foods that are rich in fat and rich in sugar. Okay, they're just not common in nature. You either have one that's rich in sugar and one that's rich in fat, but they're separate. They're not typically the same food. Very rare to find a food. There's very few cases of foods that have high levels of sugar and high or moderate levels of sugar and moderate levels of fat. Okay. And so food scientists sort of cottoned onto this quite early on, that if you combine sugar and fat together in a certain ratio, you can get an amazing dopaminergic response, right? You can really get people to whoa, want more of this. And then they sort of started to take it to the next level, which was that works. But then also, if you start to take out nutrition, right, you start to take out the actual sort of reason for eating the food beyond just the energy, the actual nutrition, the vitamins and the minerals and the macros, the other macros like protein and things. You start to take that out of the food, and you then increase this energy in that ratio of sugar to fat, you can get an even bigger dopaminergic or reward system response. Okay. And so we're sort of overfed with calories, but undernourished. So we have an abundance of calories, we have an abundance of energy, but we have a lack of nutrition in the underlying food, right? And that's how I would classify these hyper palatable foods. They're put together in sort of unnatural, right, or not evolutionarily consistent ratios of different macronutrients. They're devoid of nutrition, so they've extracted parts of that nutrition out. And so our bodies go, wow, it's all this energy, but we're still looking for that nourishment. So we're still sort of hungry in some respect, which leads, can lead people to easily overeat. Okay. So I think that the reason why these diets are like yo-yo diets and people go on and get some success, but then they revert, and it's this cycle that continues to repeat, is because we haven't actually dealt with the underlying issue. And I think that comes through education. And if we all looked at food and nutrition as trying to nourish our bodies and fuel the activities that we do with our bodies, you kind of solve most of that dilemma. But instead, we typically look at food as this way of like making us feel good, feel special, or like we're eating for a completely different reason.
That's kind of wild to think about. Eating and eating and eating, but not being nourished. So we're not actually solving the issue of nourishing yourself, and thus stimulating more hunger, and thus driving you to overeat. That's kind of a wild cycle.
Yeah, I think it's a very useful lens to think about this through, and it's very obvious when you look at food, like the modern food industry through that lens. You can see, oh wow, that's actually really what's happened. Like processed foods specifically, or like these hyper palatable foods, they have to add fortified vitamins and minerals into them because they're so devoid of nutrition. There's many examples throughout history where people were eating the cereal crops and the rest of it, and they were developing developmental issues because they were devoid of certain nutrition. Corn's a great example. Corn's deficient in certain key amino acids, and if you don't supplement with those amino acids through other sources, if you just eat the corn, you'll end up with developmental issues. This happened, I believe, through some iron cultures that heavily farmed corn, and it happened throughout Mexico and different places where corn was a predominant source of nutrition. It's actually, it is. It's why they started to do a process with the corn with potash, and it's called enriched white hominy. So in America they have grits. Have you ever heard of grits?
I have heard of grits, but what is it? What is it exactly? It's like grits, cereal?
It's corn. It's just like corn, like maize, which is corn, that's broken down into fine granules, like polenta. But with grits, it's actually that enriched white hominy, which is corn that's soaked in potash, which is potassium essentially, and that causes a chemical reaction, and it sort of it helps create some of the proteins that are missing. So it makes it a more complete form of nutrition, even though it's still not complete. It's closer to being complete. Yeah. So they discovered this, thousands of years ago, how to do this with corn because they were experiencing the issues from not getting all that nutrition. So the whole idea of eating is to nourish the body, provide the building blocks and the nutrition that your body requires to sustain itself, and then also get the energy to complete the metabolic processes that the body does.
Absolutely. You said something earlier where the food industry has hijacked certain things. I think that was your point with the corn. Yeah. So it's funny. I used to work at a grocery store in Canada, and it's a big grocery chain, and they would come out with blue menu items every so often. And it would just be packaged food, like, for example, a packaged chicken dinner, or just anything that you can find in a box in the frozen aisle or in a box in like the middle aisles. They would do a blue menu version of that product. And essentially what they would do is they would modify it and not even make it healthier. They would just market it to whatever the fad was. And at that time, the fad was sodium is bad. I need to have a low sodium diet, which is absurd because we actually need sodium. But they just hijacked this fad that was happening, and they said, okay, well, here's our blue menu this season with lower sodium. So the foods would have like 40% lower sodium. But then when you actually looked at the ingredients, there would be like other bullshit. Like it would be either higher in sugar or higher in certain fats or just something absurd, which wasn't actually making these boxed foods healthier, which they're already not healthy, but they would sort of like just hijack the fad and make people think, oh, I'm buying something healthy because it's blue menu.
Yeah.
It's crazy.
I don't, I can't imagine a world where I see a blue menu and I think healthy. like, like, what?
Yeah.
That is crazy.
Dude, sorry, I got one more. In this same grocery store, they would market beef so they would put these stickers on the beef. It's hilarious. Like I kind of want to show you. It would have a sticker and it would say corn-fed beef, and the sticker would have like this like greenish circle around it and like this other thing above it to make it look like it's healthy. Completely, what's the word? Like not, yeah, kind of like lying, but basically they were making it seem like corn-fed cows were healthy, and they would have a picture of like corn on there. Yeah. And I was like, how the fuck are they trying to tell people that corn-fed cows are a good thing? Like they're literally marketing that, and it looks like it's healthy.
Yeah.
And I just thought it was so absurd. I couldn't believe that they would have the balls. I think to this day they still have this shit. Here, I'm gonna bring up a picture so you can see what it looks like, because it is fucking hilarious.
It happens all the time, and the same thing is with natural. The words natural, and then also the word organic, right? Like we have a health system in Australia where I live, like a rating system for foods, and it's totally the health. So it's out of 5 stars, right? And the criteria is if it's low in saturated fat, it gets more stars. So the lower it is in saturated fat, the more stars it gets. So you could essentially have like something that's just sugar, and that's like 5 stars.
So, here it is. Okay, check it out. Ontario corn-fed beef. I don't know if you can see that.
Yeah.
Okay, so look at that picture, and you tell me, does that not look like a healthy picture?
Well, that's the association with green, and then the gold, and then absolutely. They're trying to make that look the shit.
Yeah, and the fit cow, and then the sticker underneath it is also a sticker with a green leaf on it, and it says Foodland Ontario.
Yeah.
So just like those 2 stickers together on the beef. I mean, I could not believe the absurdity of this. Yeah. So by the way, that's Loblaws companies there. So I'm calling you motherfuckers out because you know what you're doing, and what you're doing is wrong.
Well, what they're doing is making more money. So for them, they're right. They're right. And at the end of the day, as a consumer, you can protect yourself against being a victim or prey to that. Is just become more educated. Learn how to see through the bullshit.
That's a good point.
You can call bullshit on it. I can call bullshit on it. So yeah, learn how to see through the bullshit. But okay, so we would discuss. So the whole idea of eating is to nourish our bodies and provide the energy we need to perform the tasks that we need to do to stay alive or to enjoy ourselves, right? So that's the sole purpose of eating. You have to eat. Right? Our body cannot produce internally everything that it requires to stay alive. We have to get things from outside sources. Yeah. But I don't think that's not the common lens that people look through. Is that your experience? Like how, do you see people trying to nourish themselves on a daily basis, or do you just typically see people eating because they're hungry or whatever reason?
Well, I mean, when you go out, I guess you would only see people just eating because they're hungry, right? Like people generally in every country now are crazy busy with crazy schedules, and a lot of people don't have time to sort of make meals at home, or at least they convince themselves of that, because maybe due to bad organization or whatnot. We could talk about that too. But when you go out everyone who's essentially eating out because they don't have time is for that reason, right? So they're just eating because they're hungry, and they're not really thinking about whether or not they're nourishing themselves or not. They're just filling a void so they can continue on with their day. I don't think most people even realize that the difference between nourishing yourself and eating.
Yeah, no, no, that's sort of why I brought it up, because I don't think it's talked to. It's definitely not taught enough. Like I went to school for this, and it was not really, it wasn't really discussed in this lens. All right, we spoke about essential and non-essential and things like that, but it still wasn't framed that efficiently. Like it was made to still heavily based off, like, like on all. Yeah, I think it's sort of it's definitely been corrupted, and we've been hijacked. Our reward pathways that we evolved to have definitely been hijacked in modern times. So yeah, I think that's why most diets are pretty trash. And I can understand also why diets are very effective, because there's just so many things to choose from in terms of different foods you can eat, different combinations of those foods and everything else. And how do you know what to pick? And so a diet is just a very efficient way to constrain the amount of choices that you otherwise have to make. And it sort of limits your search space for what to eat, for your choice. So, that diet can be very useful. Yeah. And diets can be really useful in that sense. And so they can sort of take a very complex space and narrow it down to a very, sort of finite, predefined pathway that makes it very easy for people to follow.
So based on the literature, the only diet that is more sustainable than the others is the Mediterranean diet. So what about the Mediterranean diet do you think is that allows people for it to be more sustainable in comparison to the fad diets?
I would say because it's what the Mediterranean diet is, sort of the foods it's sort of based around, or the way of eating that it's sort of based around, it's quite nourishing. It leads to nourishment. You're eating a nice, diverse range of things that in the Mediterranean are grown in soils that have, quite good nutrient density. And so you're eating vegetables and meat and certain, like olive oils and things like that are grown in environments that have great soil quality. There's nutrients in the soil. So therefore, there's more nutrients in those plants, in those vegetables, in the fruits, in the animals that you're eating. There's a level of nutrition. And so you're getting nourished from eating that diet in the Mediterranean. And so when you're nourished, right, you don't necessarily have that same urge to then overeat, because you're not looking for nutrition. Your body's been nourished. And then you don't have that same hunger, that same craving, because you've been nourished. Whereas if you take the Mediterranean diet, you grow the foods somewhere else, and you start in soils that are devoid of nutrition, they don't have much nutrition in them, and you start feeding people that same diet, I'd say I would hypothesize that they would typically overeat, because the body is looking for that nutrition. So I think a part of overeating is that if you're undernourished, if you don't have that nourishment, you're not fulfilled nutritionally, right? The building blocks, the vitamins and the minerals and the enzymes and cofactors and all those other things. If you're not fulfilled there, you will always be looking for food, because your body is seeking that nourishment. Yeah? And so if all you have available to you is hyperpalatable, nutrient poor, right, but calorie-rich foods, it's very easy to overeat. Right? It forms its own loop, right? Because you eat this food that gives you this big reward pathway, like, yes, this is great food, but then it's like, hold up, it's missing the nutrition. What? But then it's so rewarding that that's what you go back to get the nutrition, but there's no nutrition there. So you keep trying to get these things from the thing that isn't there.
So my wife, Miss Bunny, she is a dietitian, and her whole philosophy is to actually learn what her patient likes to eat, what they enjoy eating, and simply modify things. For example, if they drink 3 coffees in a day with a teaspoon of sugar in each coffee, first she would say, okay, continue drinking your 3 coffees a day, but let's like lower the amount of sugar you're using. So instead of using a whole tablespoon or teaspoon, you use half of that, right? And if you're eating, a shit ton of rice for lunch, like let's start measuring how much rice you're eating and measure out in cups and slowly but surely make modifications so they can have sort of an education in nutrition and they can sort of have this adaptive sort of nutritional lifestyle that meets their needs. And in doing so, they can begin to lose weight or become healthier. She works with a lot of people who have diabetes and obesity and high blood pressure issues. So by making these small changes, you can actually have positive clinical outcomes. So that's her whole philosophy, right? In your opinion, what do you think about that philosophy?
So, like, it's valid, right? Like that absolutely will, because essentially what you're doing is you're doing sort of portion control, and it's not radical change. It's slow, long form behavior change. And in that setting, if she's working with these people over an extended period of time, you can have decent levels of behavior change come from that, and that can become reinforcing. I think where that sort of strategy falls short is that if you're just sort of doing or trying to nudge in one way or the other, if that person is fundamentally undernourished, right? If they're not nourished, then no amount of portion control is going to address the underlying issue, which is the nourishment. And so sometimes you do have to change the foods. Sometimes you need to, sometimes you could look at a supplement if the food isn't available or it's not economically affordable for people or geographically available in their location or any other number of different things. But I think that yes, if that person who's needing that intervention is fundamentally not nourished in a certain aspect or a certain area, that's the weakest link in the chain. That's the limiting factor. If you provide that nourishment, for myself, I've experienced this, and with many people I've worked with, once you nourish the body, lots and lots and lots of the cravings and the bad, so-called bad eating behaviors typically change themselves. And then on top of that, there's a huge psychological aspect. Okay, so people could be looking for those bad foods or those hyperpalatable foods because they're undernourished, or they could be looking for those hyperpalatable foods because they're eating for their emotions. They're trying to make themselves feel good, or they're very stressed, or they're they don't have an effective way to process their emotional states or their feelings, so instead they eat them. Okay, and Lisa Feldman Barrett, the lady we spoke about last week in the emotions pod, she actually has this amazing point in her book, How Emotions Are Made, which is that carbohydrates actually act as a mild analgesic in the body. Now, analgesic just means painkiller, right? So carbohydrates have a mild pain-killing effect. So if you look at it through that lens, right, you see that, oh, wow, we have a society of people who are medicating themselves because they're in chronic pain or discomfort. Okay, so like physical or psychological pain. And when they eat those carbohydrates, they have a moment of pain relief. And so you can look at obesity through that lens and say, oh, wow, this is actually like, a crisis in pain management. These people are self-medicating through foods or hyper-rich, hyper-palatable foods. And the outcome of that is that they're storing all this excess energy on their bodies.
We previously had a discussion, not on the podcast, but just a personal discussion about the philosophy, my wife's philosophy in terms of treating her patients. And you made a solid point, and I actually reflected on the point that you made. Your point was, well, in the universities, where they're actually training these dietitians and they're teaching them these philosophies, really these philosophies, not sure if it's intentional, but if it's unintentional or not, what it does is it keeps the patients coming back and needing them because it doesn't actually cure them, right? It just prolongs or reduces the symptoms for a longer period of time. So they don't actually, you know, like what you said was they don't essentially become cured of nutritionally cured of what their underlying issues are because they just become dependent on needing to come back to a dietitian for an ongoing basis. And I agree with that. I think that you're right about that. So what do we do with these populations if fad diets are not sustainable and dietitians are essentially just putting band-aids on the problem?
Yeah. So quickly to address what you just said, I think the ultimate answer is education. Right? That really is that is the only real way is to educate people on what food is and why we have to eat and drink. Like it's to nourish the body and fuel the activities of the body. So it's energy plus building blocks, like that's why we eat. And there's essential things and there's non-essential things. If you eat to satisfy the essential things first, all right, and you've still got you still have excess calorie requirements, then fill them with whatever you like. Yeah, but nourish first. But to the point that you were making, the point I was, and you summed it up well. There's another way to sort of think about it, which is there isn't an inherent incentive for the dietitian. And this isn't just about dietitians. This is also present in other fields. One common one is psychology, right? Psychiatrists, psychologists, physiotherapists, massage therapists. Lots of different fields have this same problem, where if you solve the person's underlying problem, they no longer need you, right? So it's sort of built into the business model. They need to keep you dependent in a way because that's how they make money. That's how they have a living. And so there isn't necessarily intrinsic reason to cure or to solve your problem completely, because when they do, you've just lost a client. And so I think that's hard to get away from. And yeah, so ultimately the answer is education. And if we were all more educated in what is the point of eating and drinking and the rest, and it's actually to nourish and energize the body, we could all think about it more clearly, and we would be able to make more informed decisions in regards to that. But I also think that we've been hijacked by the wokeness, right? And now we are trying to communicate that being morbidly obese or fat is healthy. And I think that we're very abstracted away from sort of the reality of the thing, which is what is body fat, right? Like we're not allowed to fat shame people nowadays, and fat is beautiful, big is beautiful. You've seen it on the front of Cosmopolitan magazine and all these other things. Like you got these huge, these big men and women who are carrying excess amounts of energy stored on their body, right? And we're told that this is normal, this is healthy, and this is beautiful. Okay. Now let's just quickly have a discussion about what is fat. All right. Fat is a form of energy. Okay. But it's also something that in our bodies provides structure as well. Okay. So every cell in your body, what makes it a cell is the phospholipid bilayer. Okay. That's the thing that encompasses the cell. And that's what makes a cell a cell. It divides it from its environment, right? Or it separates it. It partitions it from its environment. And so every cell needs fat to have a phospholipid bilayer, lipid being fat, phospholipid bilayer. Okay. So fat is energy, and it also provides structure in the body. Okay. Protein provides most of the structures in the body. Okay. It can also be broken down into energy, but it's a very long pathway in the human body. And both of those are essential. You need both of those. You need to ingest both protein and fat to maintain and sustain your structure in your body over time. Okay. Carbohydrates are not essential, but they are an effective form of energy that your body can use to do activity, movement, thought, everything else. And it just so happens that your muscles can prefer to use sugars or carbohydrates for certain activities, like explosive muscle movements, or movements for extended periods of time. You can also use fats for that as well. But they're an effective and convenient form of energy. Okay. Now, when somebody is obese or fat or morbidly obese or carrying excess fat, all they're really doing is they have an excess of stored energy on their body. They have consumed more energy than their body has used, and they're now storing it on their body, right? Now, evolutionarily, as we evolve, people that could store body fat would have, that was a very advantageous thing to do, because we didn't always have access to food. We haven't always had supermarkets. You couldn't always just Uber Eat something straight to your door when you were hungry. Back in the day, you'd have to go hunting for it. And if there were no animals around and there were no plants and veggies around, you didn't eat, right? Like, you just couldn't. So now, because we always have access to this, we can get it whenever we want, and that can be very dangerous. But fat is fundamentally a form of energy, right? It's a very dense form of energy. 1 gram of fat is 9 calories. Okay, 1 gram of protein is roughly 4 calories, and 1 gram of carbohydrates is roughly 4 calories. So fat is twice as energy dense as these other two things. Okay, so that's, and we can utilize our body fat as a form of energy. So when you store body fat, it's like, I'm keeping some energy on me for times when I can't guarantee that there's going to be food around. It's a backup, right? It's a backup battery. It's a backup fuel cell. It's backup energy. So people that are overweight, obese, fat, morbidly obese, etc., carrying, I would say beyond 25% body fat, that starts to become a bit of a joke, all right? You're carrying around an immense amount of excess energy, and we can do the math on this. It'd actually be pretty fun. We can do the math on it to see, like, how many kilos of fat equals how many days of energy. Like, so, I've worked this out previously. I'll get the math up in a second. But it works out to be around, like, if you have 20 to 30 kilos of excess fat on you, that's enough energy to sustain yourself without eating for like 160 to 190 days. And we just don't need that in modern times. It's just unnecessary.
Yeah.
So it's like, if you're carrying an immense amount of excess fat, or even 20 or 30, 40 kilos of excess fat on your body, right? Are you like the ultimate doomsday prepper?
Yo, fuck yeah, dude. That's what obese people should start saying.
Yeah, I'm a doomsday prepper.
I'm just doomsday prepping. Yo, relax, guys. This is for doomsday. Yeah, that's hilarious.
So does that kind of make sense?
Yeah, absolutely. So, because I'm an idiot, I had an idiotic thought about what the future of diets could be. And I had this thought a while ago. I'm sure I'm not the only one, but basically I was thinking, like, if we could map out our genome and understand, like, our genome, which we can already do, we might be able to have some sort of adaptive food strategy that complements our genome. So what foods, basically that's it. What foods essentially complement our genes? What do you think about that kind of strategy for optimizing health?
So I love that. You can already sort of do this to a degree, right? It's not going to be as high fidelity as what you're sort of talking about, but right now you can do it quite well. So there's a decent amount of literature on the things that the human body sort of needs, right? That are essential to maintain and sustain a human body, right? And so you can map out the space of essential things, and there will be certain amounts of each of those things that are dependent on what you do with your body, right? How you treat your body, what activity you do, all of those different things. You will burn through different vitamins, different minerals, different compounds at different rates, okay? So like being very stressed means that you turn over, like magnesium and different things at faster rates, okay? So you might need to replenish them at a faster rate than somebody else. This is why there is no one size fits all. Okay, but no, what you're saying about mapping out the genome and trying to eat, to nourish the body, that's how we'll get to that point. That's how we'll get closer and closer to approximating what it actually means to truly nourish your body, right? With all of those things, and that I think that will have an amazing effect on health. I really do. I think that will have a very, very big effect on health. It's also funny because so many people now in this modern time, there's quite a few prominent, very wealthy people who are doing these anti-aging experiments, who are reversing their biological clock and spending all this money on all these different things to try and, reverse aging, compounds and different things like that. When, one of the simplest strategies is actually just make sure you're nourished, right? Really make sure you're nourished. And then a lot of these things will go a lot further than otherwise. And so, starting from that nourishment perspective is the key, and being able to see what your body actually fundamentally requires on a day-to-day, week-to-week, month-to-month, year-to-year basis. If we have a more clear view of that, then we can better approximate it with our eating habits. So I think that is the future. It really is.
Do you think one way someone could do it without actually mapping out their genome is to essentially look at what their grandparents were eating and sort of adapt a similar diet to what their grandparents consumed, assuming that their grandparents were healthy and of healthy weight as well? Because that would sort of be like a downstream of what's it called when you are able to, what's that?
It's a downstream from their genome, like it's
epigenetics.
Yeah, but it's consistent with their genetics.
Right. So do you think that could be a strategy that people might be able to apply to their current lifestyle to sort of optimize their health?
I do, in a sense, right? So it's funny. Funny you say that, because if I look back at what my grandparents ate early in their lives, so I was quite lucky because on my mum's side, I spent quite a bit of time with my grandparents, but specifically my grandmother. And, they would eat organs. They would eat heart and liver. They would eat tripe. They would eat the whole animal. Okay. They would also eat vegetables and things like that, but it was predominantly it was a whole food, animal-based diet. Okay. And so I've sort of switched to more of that style of nutrition now as well. And I feel fantastic. My markers for health, in blood work, but also in terms of my own perceived sense, right, and vitality and vigor and function, have all improved since doing that. And there's, you can link it to there's those things are very nutrient dense. Animal organs, like I eat brain, I eat heart, I eat liver, I eat kidney, I eat tripe, I eat skin, crackling and all those kinds of different things. Bone marrow, especially, I eat a lot of. And so since doing this, yes, I feel fantastic. And so I can understand that for some people that might be a useful strategy. I also think on top of that, there's room for error in there as well. Like you said, it's given that your ancestors were healthy and all of those other things. But I think nutrition is just one aspect, right? So you could be nailing your nutrition. You could be eating all these nutrient-dense foods and everything else. But if you're still diseased in your mind, like if you're in a state of dis-ease in your mind, okay, you have models that don't result in you feeling free, or you're in a state of dis-ease mentally, you will burn through the nutrition so much faster because of that stressful state. And I also believe that your mental state influences your physical state, and your physical state influences your mental state. And so you can get stuck in these loops because of that, right? So if you're in a state of dis-ease mentally, right, you're essentially producing poisons in your body continuously. And then your body's having to continuously deal with those poisons. So you're burning through nutrition at a much faster rate. So if you're going to have that in your mind, you have to overcompensate. You have to overnourish. Like you have to eat more than you otherwise would have. Yeah. And I also think that the inverse of that is true, which is that if you have a blissful state of mind, you have mental models and ways of viewing the world that lead to not be in a state of dis-ease mentally, then you start to produce tonics within your body. Your body nourishes itself, and it doesn't burn through those things quite as quickly as if you're in that state of dis-ease. Okay, And so you can you don't have to be as on that nutrition as much. That kind of makes sense. It helps to be on it, but it's created the space where you're not burning through those things at such a fast rate. So you got a little bit more wiggle room. Does that kind of make sense?
Yeah, absolutely. I kind of want to expand on the emotions part that you mentioned. So a friend of ours, their dad, I attempted to help a little bit here and there with his weight problem, right? Through getting him to try and just eat healthier, eat less. And he was always battling with these diets and trying to lose weight. And he was even working out and he just couldn't lose any weight, right? So I would always go back to the same conclusion with him. I would ask him, well, do you feel stressed out? Are you a stressful person, right? And his wife would butt in and she would say, yes, he's a very stressful person. And then he would say, yeah, like honestly, I would say that I am stressed out most of the time. And I would explain to him, well, that's the first thing you have to get resolved is you have to get your stress levels in check, because when your cortisol is really high, it becomes very difficult to lose weight. And for others, it becomes difficult to gain weight. So whichever side that you're on. So that was his issue, is he was not able to control his stress. Therefore, didn't matter, the exercise that he did or the diets that he was going on, he just wasn't able to lose the weight. And I'm also thinking that age was a factor as well, right? Because he was in his mid 50s. So I think with those two things, it became very difficult for him.
Yeah.
So it's interesting that you said the emotions part, that's such like a driving force in diets.
Yeah. So this is why I think that's it's a diet is very one-dimensional. Okay. Most of the strategies that we typically use are very one-dimensional, and we need more dimensionality, right? Very few things are just, as a human, we're a complex dynamical system. Okay, so very few things are just one-dimensional with us, like we're the sum total of many one-dimensional things that end up being very high-dimensional. Okay, so with these strategies, I think you have to take a multi-dimensional approach, and the multi-dimensional approach is the psychological, right, and the physical. So start putting more nutrition into these people. Start nourishing them. Figure out what they're devoid of, and start putting that in. Okay, start nourishing the body, giving it what it's craving at the fundamental level. Okay, and most of the time it's not calories, it's nutrition. It needs to be more nutrition. Okay, nutrient dense foods. And you can figure out, you can get blood work, you can get all sorts of different things done. You can look at your fingernails, you can look at how your hair or skin, there's many indicators, okay, to figure out what you might need to start eating more of to nourish yourself. Okay, so start with that. Then we need to work on the psychological. We need to identify, why is it that this is your current behavior? Why are you doing the things that you have been doing that got you to where you are, right? Trying to address the underlying issue there. And if it is because they're stressed, or if they're eating whenever they're sad, or they're eating whenever they're disappointed, well, then we need to start working, all right, why are you disappointed? Oh, if it's because you had this expectation, and you always have this expectation, why do you have that expectation, right? Why still have that expectation if it's always letting you down, or it's always leading you to do this thing, And so then that's a two-dimensional, okay, so a more dimensional approach than the typical diet. And I think that's where we really need to start looking at this. And then ultimately, on top of that, is the education about what it is food even is. Why do we even eat, right? And it's fundamentally to nourish the body and provide the building blocks for the structures that we need in our body, and then to fuel the body. And I think that really is such a key point.
Absolutely. Absolutely. Okay, Rubes, I got to run. I got to go to my other job.
Now, this isn't a job.
Dude.
This is our fun time.
Yeah. You're right. I didn't mean to say it like that. But yeah, dude, sorry. I got to run, man. Sorry to cut it short. That was really fucking good, though.
Okay, so just to finish, thank you everybody for watching. If you want more information on this, like, comment, subscribe, share the video, let us know. We will be releasing a blog post with this as well that we'll put in the description. And feel free to comment on the blog post with any questions you have about this concept, because I don't think it's talked about very often. And we're linking this back to emotion, psychology, and like physical reality, so to speak, with nutrition and the things that we ingest into our body. So thank you all for watching. Have a great weekend or whatever day it is that you watch this video. Oscar, have fun at work.
Thanks, bro. Love you, dude.
Peace.
All right, peace, bro.
Bye.